Mason was saddened by the death of his wife and children in a vehicle accident 3 years ago. They were traveling through the highlands when their automobile skidded off the road and into a roaring river. The authorities were unable to locate the bodies, leaving Mason to weep and lament without closure or resolution. But then a miracle occurred. He noticed them wandering in a park hundreds of kilometers away from their town. Mason couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mason dashed towards them and tightly embraced each of them. Yet, as he clung to them, his wife began to cry. "I have to tell you something." Mason squinted, attempting to figure out who they were. Even though it had been 3 years since the disaster, he was still quite conscious of how his beloved wife and son looked, and he knew who he was seeing. Several questions remained unanswered, like what happened to them, why it took them so long to appear, and most importantly, was it really them? In a terrible car accident that occurred 3 years ago, Mason was involved, and as a result, both his wife and his son lost their lives. After the collision, he was knocked unconscious, but a few weeks after he came out of his coma and began to make progress. The news that both his son and his wife had passed away came to him all at once at that point. Since then, he has been a patient at a facility where he is undergoing both mental and physical rehabilitation. He has been there ever since. To regain his ability to walk, he had to put forth an incredible amount of effort. It didn't even leave him enough time to be sad. As a direct result of this, his health was very poor. He needed to decompress on both a physical and an emotional level, so he went for a stroll in the park that was nearby. He was taking a leisurely stroll through the park. After that, he looks off into the distance and sees what appears to be a mother and the young son she is walking with. Mason chooses to get a little closer out of curiosity. He doesn't seem to move much closer, despite the fact that walking still requires effort, and they are far more mobile. They vanish before he can approach them. He returns to the park the next day. Mason had grown exceedingly exact since his spell in the asylum. Clearly, that meant he'd return the next day at the same time and location. After exactly 1 week has passed, Mason resumes his normal routine of going for a walk each and every day. They come face to face with one another once more. Once more, the mother is seen lovingly cradling the hand of the young boy, and Mason can't help but notice the striking similarity between this woman and the boy and his own wife and son. Mason finally breaks his silence to the psychiatrist who is treating him after being readmitted to the mental institution. The psychotherapist tries to put him at ease by explaining that what he is experiencing is most likely just a phase of his grief. They won't say anything and will just leave without saying goodbye. Mason has complete faith in his psychiatrist. However, he finds it challenging to acknowledge that this explanation could be plausible. He is 100% certain of what he noticed. He considered getting an early start on his journey because his future wife and son were scheduled to show up at a specific time of the day. After that, he would be able to wait for them at the outskirts of the park, close to the entrance where they had come in. It would not be necessary for him to follow them in order to learn who they were because he could figure it out from other information. Mason makes the decision to sit down on one of the park benches and enjoy the scenery. He can't help but feel excited and giddy about the prospect that this will completely transform the course of his life. The mother and the young child finally make their entrance. Mason waits patiently. They're getting closer, but Mason is afraid to get any closer. He has no idea what he is seeing. Are these his wife and son? Were they not interred beneath? And didn't he pay them weekly visits? Mason chooses to see his psychiatrist one day. Mason isn't very eager to speak. He just wanted to get out of his room for a few minutes. The psychiatrist tries, but fails to communicate with him. He requests that Mason resume his daily walks. Mason agrees, but only under one condition. Mason would like to reduce the amount of medication he takes. He blames the fact that he sees his wife and son in his head on the drugs, but he really believes that he sees them there. Mason resumes his walk in the park after a few days of taking less medicine and feels the difference. He is quite thankful. But then he notices the woman and boy again. He has no idea what he is seeing. He cleaned his face with water to make sure he believed his eyes, and then he saw them again. Maybe it wasn't the meds. The closer Mason gets to the woman and her child, the clearer the picture becomes. Mason becomes increasingly aware of how they actually appear, as opposed to how he envisioned them. They may resemble Mason's wife and kid, but Mason now realizes they are not. Then, after deciding what to do, something unusual occurs. The woman is having a conversation with Mason right now. She is a joy to be around. The woman wants to know what's going on, and if he needs any help with anything in particular. Mason does not know what to say next. However, despite their striking resemblance, the woman is not actually his wife. As he tries to give a response, he stutters and then he walks away. But as time went on, he came to lament his choice. Mason changes his mind after a few meters and turns around. He notices the woman and the child getting ready to go. They walk past him, and he has no idea what to say to them. "Excuse me, madam," he says. "May I ask you a question?" The woman was taken aback by the inquiry that followed. "Did you have a car accident 3 years ago?" Of course, the woman does not answer at first. She is simply looking at him. Mason then asks his query again, this time more slowly and sensitively. A woman's tear falls down her cheek. She finally responds. Yes, she responds. Mason is skeptical of what he is hearing. He's the one who's quiet now. "I don't know who you are, but we need to talk, don't you agree?" he asks to the woman. The woman initially does not respond. Ultimately, the woman gives in. They'd arranged to meet the following day. Mason dreams about the mom and her young son all night. He gets up extra early to avoid being late. He can't be too early, either, because he needs all the time he's been given to chat to the woman and her son. Regrettably, a terrible stumbling block would develop. Mason has arrived at the front desk and is asked to check out of the hotel. When he looks around, he sees the park's gardener talking to a group of physicians just as he is about to leave. Mason only gets responses from the physicians when he greets them. Mason's physicians inform him he can't go to the park anymore. He can still go out, but the park is closed for the time being. This was devastating for Mason. The park meant everything to him. He gets outdoors and begins walking. But he was about to make a life-altering decision. He doubts everything. Why would he let an intruding gardener wreck his life? Why would he listen to doctors telling him what he can and cannot do? He turns around and walks as fast as he can to the park. Mason arrives at the park shortly after and discovers that there is no gardener. He walked past the fountain and was now only a few minutes away from meeting the mother and her son. He walks to the seat, looks in the distance, and notices a woman and a young boy sitting on it. He approaches the woman and her young son. There she was, a woman who looked exactly like his wife, and a boy on her lap who looks exactly like his son. It's the mom and child from previously. He greets them but receives no response. What was the situation? He inquires whether anything is wrong. The mother then responds, "We were very concerned. We were afraid you had set us up or something because you were so late, and now you're looking worried. Are you all right, Mason?" Mason is relieved to hear her concern, since it confirms her sincerity, and they finally unveil themselves. Mason was well aware that they were not his wife and son and had no reason to believe otherwise. On the other hand, they were involved in a collision 3 years ago. They had survived, but her husband and the boy's father had passed away while they were still young. It was merely a coincidence, or perhaps it was predetermined by fate, that Mason, the mother, and her son ended up running into each other. A short time later, after the two of them had become close friends, Mason was allowed to leave the asylum.